Elmer J. McCurdy was born on New Year's Day, 1880, in Washington, Maine, a small coastal town known for its natural abundance of red ochre. McCurdy's mother, Sadie, was a single 17-year-old girl who kept secret the identity of Elmer's father. Many speculate it was her older cousin, Charles Smith, who bore the same namesake as one of McCurdy's future aliases. Before he could even walk, though, let alone rob trains or pilfer banks, McCurdy's life was flipped upside down. He was adopted by his Uncle George and Aunt Helen, who feared Sadie would be condemned for the rest of her life, raising a child she bore out of wedlock. When McCurdy turned 10 years old, Uncle George passed away, and Elmer was reunited with his mother. Together with Aunt Helen, the unlikely trio up and moved north to Bangor, Maine, a much larger lumber town nestled along the Penobscot River. It was at their new home in Bangor when Sadie decided to reveal Elmer's true parentage. The young boy was incredulous by the revelation, unwilling to accept the life of a bastard. Obviously, though, he had no other choice, but that did little to quell his growing frustration. From this moment on, folks would describe McCurdy as rebellious and unruly. It became such a problem that not long after turning 13, he turned to liquor. Soon thereafter, he was known all over Bangor as the town drunk. After ostracizing himself from most of his family, McCurdy was given a room at his grandfather's place, who was determined to straighten up the off-kilter teen. He secured his grandson an apprenticeship with the local plumber, and McCurdy actually took well to the change in scenery. Elmer was said to be a good worker, if not all that skilled. He put in the effort and made enough money to save up some cash and avoid poverty. That is until 1898, when the slow-burning economic recession finally reached the Maine woodlands, and McCurdy lost his plumber gig. The sun set even further 2 years later, when at the turn of the century, he lost both his mother and his grandfather to a ruptured ulcer and Bright's disease, respectively. After the disasters of 1900 left McCurdy directionless, he decided to leave the shadows of Bangor and Maine as a whole behind him. He soon became a drifter, meandering up and down the eastern regions of the United States. He could scrounge up money through contract work as both a plumber or a lead miner, but he never stuck around any one place for too long, mainly due to his addiction to alcohol. Eventually, McCurdy wandered west, ending up in Cherryvale, Kansas, where he stayed sober long enough to get a plumbing job once more. For the next few years, he hung around Kansas, testing the waters of small settlements such as Iola. In 1905, he was put in jail for public drunkenness, and after serving a bit of time, he left the heartland for Webb City, Missouri. Another couple of years later, and McCurdy had had enough of the manual labor life. He joined the Army in 1907, stationed at Fort Leavenworth, and trained for demolition missions. It was in this training he learned how to use nitroglycerin, a tool that would come in handy later in the ascending Outlaw's legend. In November of 1910, McCurdy's short stint as a machine gun operator came to a close. He was honorably discharged and decided to return to Kansas after one of the few friends he made in the Army invited him to revel in retirement. Together, the two pals hatched a plan to become professional burglars, slowly building an arsenal fit with chisels, gunpowder, money sacks, hacksaws, and most importantly, nitroglycerin funnels. Before they could embark on their criminal escapade, however, they were arrested for the possession of these items in St. Joseph on November 19, 1910. During their trial, McCurdy pleaded innocent, explaining to the judge that he and his army buddy were simply working on an invention for a foot-controlled machine gun. The jury were none the wiser, and after biting the boy's bait, found both men not guilty. McCurdy was free of his shackles, but his thirst for lawlessness was just beginning. With the basic concepts of nitroglycerin manufacturing down pat, McCurdy was confident enough to implement its use in his newfound career as a thief. He saw trains, banks, and other financial establishments as equal investments. nothing a bit of explosives couldn't handle. However, it was obvious McCurdy was in over his head more often than not. He rarely used the right amount of nitroglycerin to engage in a worthwhile sting. Sometimes he used too little and would smoke himself out and cause a scene. Sometimes he used too much and would destroy what little payday was waiting for him on the other side. Eventually, the heat was on, and McCurdy was forced to drift south yet again. He moved to Lenape, Oklahoma in the spring of 1911 and quickly circled his next target. After catching wind that a safe containing over $4,000 was hiding in a car attached to Train 104 of the Iron Mountain Missouri Pacific Railway, he rounded up 3 henchmen to aid his bidding. Unfortunately for everyone involved, McCurdy's knowledge of nitroglycerin was still amateur at best. After halting the train on its tracks, they marauded each car until the safe in question was uncovered. Then, McCurdy charged the safe door with the explosives. Only, he went overboard for the umpteenth time and blew the safe into smithereens. All of the cash inside was reduced to dust, and most of the silver had melted into the remains of the safe. In all, the train robbery netted each man $500 at most. The next operation occurred back up north, at the Citizens Bank in Chautauqua, Kansas. It was September 21st, and McCurdy's posse was down to 3 men. For 2 straight hours, they clobbered away at one of the bank's walls, eventually tearing it down with nothing but a few hammers. Elmer was successful in his first attempt at laying nitroglycerin charges. The outer vault door was blown off without a hitch. However, the door to the vault's precious insides met a different fate, with the leftover explosives unable to ignite. The McCurdy trio got spooked and fled the scene, only stashing away $150 in loose coins scattered amongst the trays of the bank. Elmer split off from his cronies, took a train to the outskirts of the Kansas-Oklahoma border, and hid in a friend's hayshed close to Bartlesville, where he spent much of the remainder of his life in hiding, drinking himself into submission like the good old days. A couple of weeks later, McCurdy made his final attempt at fame and fortune. He heard of an incoming Katy train filled with $400,000 in pure cash, coming through Keesaw, Oklahoma on October 4th. The money was en route to the Osage Nation in the form of a royalty payment. A man could only dream of robbing that much loot, and now it was reality. He'd be damned if he messed up this time. As the train rolled closer to the depot, McCurdy and 2 new hired hands stopped the steam engine with confidence. It was to their horror, though, when they stepped aboard the first rail car and found they had stopped a passenger train on accident. Unwilling to walk away empty-handed, McCurdy and company stole the $46 the mail clerk had on his person, along with 2 carboys of whiskey, an old coat, the conductor's wristwatch, and a 6-shooter. Down on his luck and more defeated than ever, McCurdy trudged back to Charlie Rivard's ranch, where his clandestine hideout was awaiting him. By then, it was October 6th, and all the hapless outlaw wanted to do was get drunk on the whiskey he'd plundered. His body was weakening. By that point, he'd been fighting off pneumonia and roundworms. While McCurdy went off on his last binge, the local law enforcement quickly gathered enough intel to list Elmer J. McCurdy as their prime suspect. A $2,000 reward was posted that evening, and a posse of lawmen were dispatched with haste. On October 7th, long after sunset, but well before dawn, Deputy Sheriff Dick Wallace and the Fenton brothers, Bob and Stringer, canvassed the surrounding territory with the help of their trusty bloodhounds. The hounds took the trio of lawmen all the way to the exact hayshed McCurdy took shelter in. McCurdy, no stranger to violence, wasn't about to go down without a fight. The following is an excerpt from the Daily Examiner, as orated by Sheriff Bob Fenton himself. It began just about 7 o'clock. We were standing around, waiting for him to come out, when the first shot was fired at me. It missed me, and he then turned his attention to my brother, Stringer Fenton. He shot 3 times at Stringer, and when my brother got under cover, he turned his attention to Dick Wallace. He kept shooting at all of us for about an hour. We fired back every time we could. We do not know who killed him. On the trail, we found one of the jugs of whiskey, which was taken from the train. It was about empty. He was pretty drunk when he rode up to the ranch that night. At the end of the standoff, Elmer McCurdy finally met his maker. He was shot in the chest by a single bullet and died as a result of his wound. To this day, it's unknown which of the 3 deputies fired the fatal round. As soon as the smoke cleared and McCurdy was pronounced dead, his body was taken to the mortician in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, Joseph L. Johnson. Of course, no one near or far was going to claim the body, as most of McCurdy's family was long dead, and his friends were never really friends to begin with. He died a drunken and dreary bandit. Nothing more, nothing less. In response to the corpse going unclaimed, Johnson preserved the body under early 20th century standards. He first embalmed the body in a concoction of arsenic and other preservatives, before dressing McCurdy in formal wear and storing him behind the funeral home. For years, the body went further unclaimed, but Johnson refused to do anything with him prior to being paid for his work. The old mortician eventually grew tired of waiting around and decided to capitalize on McCurdy's status in limbo. He removed the dead man's suit and instead dressed the body in street clothes, before positioning a rifle in the grip of his stiff, lifeless hands. Johnson found a little corner in the funeral parlor perfect for McCurdy's new resting place, now known all over town as the bandit who wouldn't give up. McCurdy's story was sensationalized, and soon, folks all around Pawhuska were paying a nickel to feast their eyes upon the mystery man of many aliases, the Oklahoma Outlaw, the embalmed bandit. McCurdy had many nicknames post-mortem as the hullabaloo around his presence grew. Carnival organizers soon flocked to Pawhuska as frequently as the spectators, offering Johnson a legitimate sum in exchange for the corpse of McCurdy. Johnson denied every single one of them. He'd already made more than he bargained for. Why stop now? Almost 5 years to the day of McCurdy's death, on October 6, 1916, Johnson was contacted by a gentleman who referred to himself as Aver. According to Aver, he hailed from California and called Elmer his long-lost brother. With assistance from the Osage County Sheriff and a local attorney, Aver was met with little resistance from Johnson, whose hands were tied. He'd have to give up his prized outlaw-turned-mummy. A couple of days later, the body of Elmer McCurdy was picked up by Aver and a second man called Wayne. Wayne also insisted he was a relative of the McCurdy family, and that the unclaimed body would finally have a proper burial and resting place in San Francisco. There was just one problem. The train McCurdy was placed on wasn't heading west to California. It was heading north to Arkansas City, Kansas. As for Aver and Wayne, those names were merely disguises. The so-called long-lost brothers were actually James and Charles Patterson, owners of the traveling carnival, the Great Patterson Carnival Shows. Their plan to fraud Joseph Johnson and lift the body for their personal gain worked to a T. It truly was the perfect sting. For nearly 11 years, Elmer McCurdy's mummified corpse was kept on display at the Great Patterson. It was sensationalized as the outlaw who would never be captured alive, and turned a decent profit to boot. In 1922, the show lost its steam, and the carnival, along with McCurdy, was sold to Louis Sonny. Initially, McCurdy's body found itself a starring role in the morbid exhibitions of death curated by Sonny, who paraded the deceased outlaw alongside waxen replicas of infamous bandits like Bill Doolin and Jesse James. This gruesome troupe toured the country, captivating audiences with tales of lawlessness and intrigue. For the next leg in his journey, McCurdy's mummified form became a pawn in the hands of film director Dwayne Esper, thrust into the limelight to promote the sensationalism of exploitation cinema. Marketed as a tragic figure, purportedly succumbing to the vices of drug addiction, McCurdy's corpse was displayed in theater lobbies. Esper would then tell spectators his decaying skin was actually the result of a lifetime spent on dope. After Sonny's passing, McCurdy's folklore took an even stranger twist. Passed between hands like a macabre relic, his body eventually found temporary residence in a Los Angeles warehouse, before being thrust back into the world of filmmaking by David F. Friedman. It was a brief cameo, though, just a blip in the strange saga of McCurdy's remains. Ultimately, the corpse found itself in the possession of Spoonie Singe, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum, only to be deemed too ghastly for public exhibition. Downgraded to a sideshow attraction in Long Beach's amusement zone, McCurdy's corpse swung eerily within the confines of the Laugh in the Dark funhouse. The long, strange journey of Elmer McCurdy took an unexpected turn on December 8, 1976, amidst the bustling production of The $6 Million Man. As the crew maneuvered what they believed to be a lifeless wax figure dangling from the gallows, they made a bone-chilling discovery. The figure's arm snapped off, revealing not wax, but the gnarled remnants of human flesh and bone beneath. Summoned to the scene, authorities intervened, transporting the decades-old cadaver to the Los Angeles coroner's office for examination. There, Dr. Joseph Choi conducted an autopsy, unveiling the gruesome truth. This was not a prop, but the preserved remains of a human male, caked in layers of wax and phosphorus paint. Despite the passage of time, traces of arsenic, remnants of his tuberculosis, and telltale signs of past embalming procedures lingered within the Outlaw's frame. Through forensic analysis, including dental records and other modern techniques, the enigmatic cadaver was finally identified as that of Elmer McCurdy. News of McCurdy's surreal discovery spread like wildfire, capturing the imagination of the public and media alike. Amidst offers from compassionate funeral homes, it was Fred Olds, representing the Indian Territory posse of Oklahoma Westerns, who ultimately secured custody of McCurdy's remains, determined to grant the outlaw-turned-mummy a final resting place befitting his bizarre legacy. On April 22, 1977, a procession marched its way to the Boot Hill section of the Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma. There, amidst a gathering of some 300 folk, Elmer McCurdy was laid to rest once and for all. To safeguard against further schemes and misadventures, 2 feet of concrete encased his casket, ensuring that his restless spirit might find eternal peace beside his infamous compatriot, Bill Doolin. He may not have been his equal as an outlaw, but Elmer J. McCurdy's twisted tales and macabre memoir rivals any story found in Old West lore.